There were various operations. There was Operation Paperclip. There was Operation Bloodstone. Operation Bedman is the one they used to take over the operations in Iran. There was a heavy Nazi presence after the Second World War, and right on up to today in Iran. That's part of what you're seeing going on over there, as well as in Egypt. They would get in key government positions, and what you would find is that they were across the board. You find actually that, I'll give you an example of how this worked. Himmler would send Paul Dickoff, one of his trusted SS people, in 1942. He was one of these, one of the first ones to go underground. He goes to Bern, Switzerland, and he starts working immediately with Alan Dulles, who was head of the OSS, which is a forerunner of the CIA there in Switzerland. And then, of course, working together, they actually assisted to some extent in our development of the atomic bomb. They had the A-bomb before we did, but they didn't use it. Instead, there was a sort of deal and understanding made. Himmler was working with the Allies long before the end of the war through various people, including Paul Dickoff. And then Dickoff becomes later, from 1968 to 20-some years after the war, to 1972, head of Interpol, which is a very strategic position for a Nazi to have. And remember, whenever you say Nazi, you think of these people goose-stepping, with swastikas, but they don't appear like that. After the Second World War, they, appeared like regular business people, and they would get into various corporations. Walter Dornberger, who was head of the V2 and special projects of the Nazis, including some of the facilities building with their atomic research and so forth. He would come over here, be well treated. He'd become head of Bell Aero Systems in Niagara Falls, New York. All these people, welcome. And Werner von Braun, an SS, I think he was an SS major. He comes over here, prominent person with the Saturn rocket in our space program. And there were a lot of them. Some of them are lesser well known. Some of them would not be German Nazis. There were Romanian Nazis, in all of the places that the Nazis took over. And one of them, his name is Malaxa, came over to Whittier, California. And in Whittier, California, he gave $2 million, his company, to the law firm where a young Richard Nixon was to help him run for Congress in 1948. You had various people going through organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood to, set up certain things. You had the Rat Lines taking a person like Klaus Barbie down to Latin America, where you had these death squads, and you literally had the CIA allied with certain individuals with some of these operations. They were assassination teams. They would get rid of people who, the certain individuals in our government. Alan Dulles became head of the CIA after World War II, and his brother John Foster Dulles was head of the State Department. And so I try to put these details in there, and you find out certain firms like IBM had what was called these Hollerith punch cards during the 30s. They helped the German branch develop that. And, of course, that punch card technology was used throughout Germany as IBM's German subsidiary custom designed the machines and then leased them, to the Third Reich. And they could quickly identify and locate people, including European jewelry, who were then, of course, rounded up and so on. And then I.G. Farben, on the other side, you had the Dulles brothers representing I.G. Farben in the court system here. And what you find is that companies like that were connected with the Paralite and the Dulles brothers, they mysteriously avoided getting bombed. I.G. Farben plants, 87% of them were still intact at the end of the war, even though you'd think we would have been bombing them, because they were producing a lot of the war-making material. So through the war and after the war, the secret plan proceeded. And like I say, there are certain individuals like Alan Dulles who are agents of the Paralite. They're not members of it, but they're agents of the Paralite executing these plans.
Now, a moment ago, you mentioned something that I want to get back up into. You spoke about Iran. Didn't the Germans, the Nazis, believe that the Aryan race had some kind of roots in Iran? Isn't there some kind of racial, ethnic, people group connection there?
Yeah, in fact, that's what the word means. It's sort of, Iran has a meaning of Aryan. And then what you would find is a sort of a connection where you had, as I mentioned, you have Operation Bloodstone. After the war, there were a lot of these various operations, and Bloodstone was approved by a Frank Wisner, with the CIA, and they would actually have assassins. There would be, they would go out and assassinate people, these Nazis who were used during that operation, and that was followed by Operation Bedman, which is the one where we used the Nazis and others in Iran to overthrow Mossadegh, who was the nationalist leader, elected leader of Iran, and installed the Shah of Iran. And so that proceeded apace. And what you had more recently, show the connection to this stuff, you had Frank Wisner Jr. recently. He was the one who was sent as an envoy by President Obama over to Hosni Mubarak, telling him, Hosni, it's time to leave. And the very next day, Mubarak says, I'm leaving as president of Egypt. So this is a continuation of these various operations. And the actual operation that overthrew Mossadegh was called Ajax. And the Nazis in Iran were very useful and worked together. General Norman Schwarzkopf's father had been with the New Jersey State Police. He retired. And then Allen Dulles used the $10 million slush fund that they had with the CIA in Europe to train people to overthrow the nationalists. Apparently doesn't like strong nationalist leaders, whoever they are, or strong nationalism. That's why Israel is a target of these individuals, and why the Muslim Brotherhood is deliberately planned to gain strength in Egypt and Tunisia and Libya and Syria and everywhere else, so that they can basically surround Israel and threaten them and coerce them economically and with other ways. Hamas is sort of opening up the way to more terrorist attacks from the West against Israel. And so all of this is a strategy to bring about, as I said, this world socialist government. And Iran was very important in that, not only from a military standpoint, but religiously, because we actually paid the Ayatollah Kashani to go along with this overthrowing of the government, Mossadegh, in Iran. And then his protege was Ayatollah Khomeini. And so when it was time for the Shah to leave in the late 70s, we actually put Khomeini into power, and we actually paid him millions and millions of dollars and gave him the arms that we were going to give to the Shah. Thanks for having me.
One of the areas that we don't want to leave out is Israel. And, of course, the economy in America as well as in Israel, I understand, is very precarious. There are some student revolts, the kind of things that are going on in England. Tell us about how Israel fits into this picture.
Well, that'll take a little bit, but it's very useful, and I'm glad you raised that question, because it's strategically and biblically important. And I'll just hit a high spot recently. What you have is NATO has become a peacekeeping surrogate for the New World Order. It's not just my analysis. I have quotes from 1993 where Senator Joe Biden, now Vice President, was talking to Warren Christopher in his confirmation hearings to become Secretary of State, saying exactly that. How can we pursue the New World Order? And then Warren Christopher says, well, we could have NATO become a peacekeeping surrogate. And that's why NATO has been very, very prominent, not only in the Balkans, but now recently in Libya. In terms of economics, what you have is certain key individuals, and I mentioned them at the beginning of the book. You have Javier Solana, very powerful individual with the European Union, and he is literally a creation of the power elite. He was taken as a physics teacher in the state of Virginia. He's from Spain, but he was in the state of Virginia as a physics teacher and made one of the most powerful people in the world by Bill Clinton and Strobe Talbot and our ambassador to Spain, Richard Gardner, all of whom are Rhodes Scholars. And Cecil Rhodes was a member of the power elite. And he had a secret society, the Society of the Elect, he said, to absorb the wealth of the world and take the government of the whole world. And so Javier Solana, as well as others, are on this particular board with George Soros, who's very, George Soros a few years ago literally crushed the economy of Malaysia. You could, at the click of a mouse, you could put billions of dollars into or out of a country and affect their economy drastically. And I remember just a few years ago when Olmert was leader of Israel, he was prosecuting the war against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and all of a sudden, before the last push, it came to a screeching halt. And everybody says, why would he do this? Well, he had just had a visit from Javier Solana. And I think Javier sort of read him the riot act. You know, if you want any future loans, if you want any future foreign investments, you back off. You can give them a pop, give them a whack, but we don't want any all-out war because that's not in our interest and not part of the Paralite's interest. And so, with that as a preface, let me back up and show how this thing developed over the years. I'll try to whiz through it. And it'll take a little bit, but I think it's very important for your listeners to understand this. What has happened with this ultimate plan of the Paralite to create a world socialist government is to create it as a feudal F-E-U-D-A-L entity. That's why today you see China is feudal and elite at the top, but a very large underclass for cheap labor at the bottom. Same thing with India. Very educated, highly motivated elite at the top, but a large underclass. They used to be called the untouchables in India. You also find in Israel increasingly a shrinking middle class, an elite, and then a lot of people who are in desperate situation economically. And you also see it in California, which often leads the rest of the states. The same, you have the middle class is getting hammered with taxes. They're fleeing to Colorado and other places. So it's going to be a feudal system, world socialist government and a feudal system. Now, what happened was, you have an individual like Cecil Rhodes with a secret society. Lord Milner, Alfred Milner, is the one who executed Rhodes's plan after his death. In 1923, in the House of Lords, Milner says, in the Palestinian area, there should be no Jewish nation or Arab nation. It should be an international area run by this international mandatory authority. So he didn't want a Jewish nation there to begin with. And so what happened was an Iranian named Al-Afghani in the 1800s had become associated with the British intelligence, Cecil Rhodes's plan. And Al-Afghani, he devised with the British an idea of a pan-Islamic crescent running from Egypt all the way over. In fact, you could spread it out today from Spain over to Indonesia. But his plan was he began in Egypt and would come all the way across through the Middle East and over to Pakistan. And this would be a pan-Islamic crescent. And the idea behind that was you wanted to break down national authority, to break down nationalism. You have to convert it to something else. So it became an allegiance to Islam rather than to a particular nation. Now, there are members of the power elite, and they have agents whose loyalty is first to the power elite. One of them is Herbert Samuel. He was Jewish. In the 1918, he's one of the first people I've ever found, and in the House of Lords, and you can find this in the House of Lords record. It's called Hansard. It's like our congressional record. Twice in 1918, Herbert Samuel is referring to a new world order. We need a new world order. So what he did was, as an agent of Milner and the power elite, he put in place the Palestinian area as the head of that, a fellow named al-Husseini. And he immediately, in the 1930s, with the approval of the Muslim Brotherhood, had these almost like death squads. He had been, even before Herbert Samuel, who was Jewish, had put him in power, he had been killing lots of people, including Jews. And they took up, who do you want, the people of the area, and he came in like fourth. But Herbert Samuel put him in there because he would be a tool of the power elite, and he would ally and the Muslim Brotherhood with Adolf Hitler. Another person who was Jewish, whose first allegiance, though, was a power elite, was Hermann Erbin. He was a Nazi. He worked with the Nazis. He worked with the Soviets, and he converted to Islam, supposedly, but he converted to Islam. The point being, there are people who call themselves Christians or Jewish or whatever, but some of them, if they're agents of the power elite, their first loyalty is to the power elite rather than their own particular faith. Okay, so what you had was the effort on the part of the Nazis to build a war machine, and it was built over and over and over again. And what you found was that part of this, in addition to National Socialism, was a philosophy which would allow the Holocaust to occur. And it was based on eugenics. And Rockefeller, the Rockefeller family, was one of the key supporters of eugenics. John D. Rockefeller II introduced Margaret Sanger to the wealthy people. She started the birth control movement and Planned Parenthood, and she would actually say that there were certain dysgenic stocks. These are inferior people. She had a Negro project, lots of abortions for blacks, and she hired some black ministers to sort of mislead blacks as to what they were going on. Other inferior types were Catholics, Gypsies, and Jews. Jews she considered inferior types. And so as part of the eugenics movement, they had to, eliminate or do great damage to those populations. And, of course, in addition to the Holocaust, you had about